Hey there, I am Dr. Amy King, otherwise known as Dr. Amy, and this podcast is The Most Important Medicine. If you're a physician or healthcare provider, this podcast is for you. This is where we learn about trauma-informed medicine and ways to build resilience in healthcare organizations. We do this through your stories and the stories of other professionals and patients. We listen to each other to transform medicine with compassion and curiosity about what it means to be a trauma-informed provider or practice. Every time you join me, I want you to hear practical information and leave with tangible tools that you can share for yourself and with your patients right away. Today, I am talking to a special guest, Dr. Nicola Harker. Nicola is a general practitioner who practiced medicine in the UK until 2017, when she transitioned to being a full-time coach and consultant. She's now a speaker, writer, and coach who focuses on self-compassion for high-performing individuals, and she has programs for providers, professionals, and caregivers. Welcome, Nicola. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. It's really, really wonderful.
Yeah. So anything you want to add to your professional bio about yourself or where you're at, what you're doing right now?
Not really. You put it beautifully, but I would add that I'm a working mum. I relate to the fact that many people have really busy lives. I'm a very practical person, probably for that reason, because the things I'm interested in need to work in busy, high pressure situations. I'm just really excited to be here to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited too. It's amazing how the world of international social media and whatnot can bring people together. So I'm so excited to have connected with you.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell me just a little bit about your story? You were a practicing provider up until 2017. Tell me a little bit about what changed in your story.
So yes, I was probably quite similar to a lot of doctors, a lot of high functioning women, a lot of people in the caring professions of all kinds, in that I was highly motivated, really driven by purpose, by my job. And I loved being a doctor. And I had I guess I'd formed an identity around who I was as a working mum, as a doctor. Compassion, outward flow of compassion was something that kind of came really naturally to me. Mm-hmm. But I was, struggling after I had my kids. I was spinning plates, trying to be in 4 different places at once, trying to keep up the appearance, to those high standards that I held for myself, and not always managing to do so, not always feeling particularly great about myself, because sometimes I would be brittle or a little bit tense or ratty, not kind of who I really thought I was. And but I was still, it was no question in my mind that I would always be a GP. That was just who I was, I thought. And I had a few kind of wake up moments during my career. So when my daughter was about 2.5, 3 years old, she's now 12. So it was a few years ago. I fell whilst I was actually cleaning the windows, whilst I also had tonsillitis and I had a fever and my father-in-law was coming to stay. The classic. Yes. It's so funny when you look back and you go, who cleans windows?
This is the story of every working mom, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's just managing all of the things. I love the analogy of spinning plates. Yeah. So
exactly. And I know that this story is relatable, because why was I even cleaning the windows? Why was I not cancelling my father-in-law because I had tonsillitis? But none of those things registered for me. I was just focused on the task. And so I remember this day, I was feeling too unwell to go and get the ladder. So I decided to stand on a log in order to reach the top window of my kitchen window. I wasn't very high off the ground, but me being me, I was like, oh, I can't, didn't really think about the fact that if you're too unwell to go and get the ladder, maybe that's a warning sign. I fell, and it was traumatic because firstly, I landed on stacked roof tiles. So the edge of the roof tiles hit my spine, lower spine. Mm-hmm. But the thing that was actually more traumatic for me was opening my eyes, lying on the floor, and realizing that I was centimeters, inches away from hitting my head on a stone well.
Oh,
So,
no.
and this was right in front of my kids. My kids were really little. And you know, that moment of like, I'm still alive, I'm okay, although I'm in a lot of pain. But that flash of thinking what nearly happened was quite traumatic. And but
goosebumps right now thinking about your little kids.
yeah,
I'm so worried about mom.
yeah, exactly. That, you know, I couldn't get up, my children running to get their dad. I could hear them. He was cutting the grass. He was somewhere down the garden. And I look back on that experience, and what happened was he helped me to my feet. And being a GP, I was like, well, I can still feel my feet. I'm fine. And I kept going.
Oh,
I didn't even stop then. And I look back and I just think how ridiculous, you know, what was going on for me. But I didn't go to the ER. I took painkillers. I didn't actually go to the ER for 3 months.
oh my goodness.
And in that time, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit. I just couldn't get comfortable. I was in so much pain. But it's kind of helpful for me looking back to realize that's how disconnected you can get from your body, from your own being, when you're working in the caring profession. And I really did. And and the funny thing is that at three months, I crawled into the ER and I got told off for waiting so long to present.
Appropriately so, right?
And they scanned my back. And the thing that happened then was that there was no fracture. There was just significant scarring. So then my brain did the whole, wow, you're making so much fuss. You haven't even broken your back. You know, get on with it. Like, why are you
not that much going on here?
Exactly. Like, I felt shame for the pain that I was experiencing. But I look back, I'm like, whoa. But so that was a really big wake up call for me. And yet what I did was I went back. I continued working. As a GP, you have to sit down for really long hours. But it was only when I realized I couldn't sit for 13-hour days that I started to think maybe I needed to do something. And, you know, that was a long time ago, and so much has changed for me. But it was the start of like the tipping point. But that was in 2013. And
Can I ask you a question, Nicola? So I think about that moment where you stand up and you're like, oh, I can feel my toes. I can feel I'm not paralyzed. I'll just kind of press on. Can you talk a little bit about how, as caring professionals, especially medical professionals, we're taught to disconnect from our feelings and bodies? Do you think that was part of it?
I absolutely do. And I think it's so important. When I went to medical school, I thought they were going to teach me how to be amazing, to deal with all the really difficult life and death situations with grace and wisdom. And actually, what they taught me at my medical school anyway was that I heard it time and again: in order to survive, you have to build a wall.
Wow.
Yeah. And I keep hearing it even now in the medical profession. Like that's the belief. There's no other way. And I actually, as a medical student, I did fight against this. My instinct was like, I'm not sure about this. This doesn't feel like what I was expecting. And I actually trained as a counselor while I was a medical student in evening classes, because I wanted to understand more. I wanted, you know, all of that stuff. But that was the training. And I think this is a huge mistake. But I do relate to why it's said, and I've thought about this a lot during my career. I think as a person coming into all of those difficult situations, and you're quite young when you first go to medical school, you know, potentially in the UK, I was only 18. Wow. You know, maybe in the US it's a little bit older, but and unfiltered empathy, when you suffer with the suffering that you see, you can't sustain it, and you're afraid of your feelings. And so my experience of that was that I was resisting what I was being told, but I also doubted myself. Can I survive as a doctor if I let myself feel?
And it feels really practical, right? It's like you
Yeah.
can feel that, like what you just said, I loved about, empathizing with the suffering. And so somebody offers to you, build a wall.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
feels really practical.
Yeah, absolutely. And after a while, I began to believe that that's what I had to do. And the kind of masculine energy that I took on through medical school was kind of like, yeah, this is how you deal with it. And nobody was talking about any alternative to that. And yes, over time, so I was doing this for more than 20 years. Over time, what I started to notice was that the wall isolates you from other people, it separates you from yourself. So I forgot who I was. I forgot my natural qualities, and I disconnected from my body. And yeah, when I was lying on the floor and I'd had that fall, it was so normal to me that I was bottom of the pile as a mum, in the family. I was the last person. And it was so unnatural for me by then to speak up and say, I'm feeling something, I'm suffering. I was so used to switching that off. I didn't see how ridiculous I was being.
Everybody was coming before you, your patients, your kid, spouse. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So common. So common.
It's so interesting though, isn't it? And I can see how it happens.
Yes.
And I understand why that's what we were taught. But I do think it's a mistake. And I feel so strongly about this now that disconnect that the wall brings costs us so much. And our patients feel it. They know when we're walled in, when they don't feel like we can resonate with their suffering. Our colleagues, we feel separate.
Say more about this, Nicola, because I think that people might be listening and saying, well, I have to stay kind of armored to be able to help my patients. And, they're not noticing, but you're saying they are noticing.
I do think so. And I think, without wanting to create pressure on any caring professional to feel like they've got to do something more, I think it's easy to think that it's not noticeable. But as a patient, I know, because I've been a patient, I've been a relative of a patient, I know that what matters to us most when we're afraid of a diagnosis or we're going for tests or anything else is less the scientific words that come from that professional's mouth. It's more the connection, the person that's saying with their eyes, with their body language, I see you, I can see that you're suffering or you're struggling. I've had so many experiences as a patient of, I remember going through IVF, and I don't mind sharing this, that, failed cycles of IVF. And the nurses who were very kind, but actually being a little bit surprised, like, you seem to be struggling with the fact that cycle failed. It's like, oh, like, I'm dying inside, like, this is killing me. And so realizing, wow, they're so used to this process, they've forgotten what it's like to be a patient. And I do think I'm not critical of the medical profession or of carers for being like that, but I'm really interested in helping us to have an alternative, some tools that help us to more skillfully stay connected to ourselves so we can take care of ourselves, and connected to our patients or whoever we're working with, that allow us to. And that's where I started to learn about compassion.
Yeah, so I want to circle back to how we find this balance, but tell us first, how did you get to that space in 2017 where you shifted your career focus?
Well, I was actually, I wasn't aware. I was going to say I was aware I was burning out. I had a viral illness that went on for a really long time, like 3 months, and I was struggling to get back to my normal energy. Another sign, but I was still ignoring. And I was very lucky that I contacted like a free counselling helpline for medical professionals.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And which is so the British Medical Association offered this for free, and they still do. It's amazing. And I knew I was struggling, but I couldn't say what was happening. But the feeling I had on the inside was, I want to run away. There's no amount of holiday that will take this feeling away. And I couldn't see the National Health Service in the UK getting better anytime soon. I was feeling so stuck, and I was feeling isolated. I now know that I was in threat mode. I was on my own with this pain. I was just dealing with workload. I didn't really know what was happening to me. And I think my blind spot was also that my identity for myself is that I have this spaniel energy. I'm an enthusiastic person. I'm so motivated. I love, everything about everything that we do. And so I couldn't even see how this fitted with my identity, like how I was feeling. I couldn't put my finger on it.
You know what? I just want to pause and say, validate this for so many people that are listening, right? That are thinking, I'm a compassionate, resilient person. I don't get burned out. I don't get overwhelmed. Like, it doesn't fit with my identity. And yet here you are, you're saying, like, I had this wall up, I was getting sick, I felt disconnected. How did you reconcile that with your identity?
Yeah, I mean, it was, my identity was a huge block to me seeing what was happening. And it was this counsellor who said, you do realise this is burnout, don't you? Mm-hmm. And I could have fallen through the floor. I was so shocked. Mm-hmm. It was not on my radar. It wasn't going to happen to me. That just completely blown away when she said it. But it was so helpful. And one of the reasons that I think, your podcast and conversations about burnout are so important is because I know I was completely like not seeing what was happening to me. And even when it was happening, I couldn't believe that it would happen to me. Mm-hmm. But for somebody else to name it was really, really helpful. I have to say, there was something else that happened around the same time that sharpened my focus, which might make me a bit emotional to say it, but I'm happy to share it, which is that 2 women that were close to me were diagnosed with cancer within the same week. And suddenly I had a really clear lens that went, oh, that could be me.
Yes.
Like I could see how unhealthy I felt, how drained I felt, and those 2 women, one of them died within 8 weeks. The other struggled on for 2 years and died. And they were both outdoorsy, outgoing, amazing, inspiring women who were just taken, like, whew. And that, I guess, sometimes that it's called Beckhart's change equation, isn't it? That we have to sometimes get more uncomfortable with where we are, to the point where we are less afraid of the alternative to make a change. And suddenly feeling like it could be me was that.
Yes. I mean, first of all, I want to say I'm so sorry. That's traumatic to have people you love suffering. I want you to say again, this change equation, that sometimes things have to get to a breaking point.
Yeah, I mean, I've for me, I reframed it as realizing that sometimes the bottom of the swimming pool isn't a bad place to reach, because you realize you have to do something, you have to go back up.
Yes.
And so, yes, this change equation is basically about the fact that we don't tend to make a change if our fear of the change is greater than the discomfort of staying where we are.
100%. Yes. Yes.
And so, it's true for all of us.
Yeah. Give an example of what you've seen in a client or something where there's discomfort over here and there's change process over here. And it's like, oh, which one's harder right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, a good example is somebody who decides to become an entrepreneur, to set up on their own. Mm-hmm. And if you're kind of comfortable, maybe you've got a partner with a good income, and you're not really focusing on, I'm going to have to charge for my services, I'm going to have to be brave, I'm going to have to be visible. It's too easy to stay in your comfort zone. And sometimes, you know, a lot of very successful entrepreneurs actually got there through difficulty, through realizing that they had to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not telling people to, you know, burn all your savings so that you suddenly feel uncomfortable. But it's definitely important to be realistic and just to go, am I really kind of sitting in resistance because it's a comfortable place to be? What would I need to change in order for staying where I am to feel more intolerable?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll make the change.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting one, and it's just about the way our brains work, isn't it? We will stay in resistance unless we can see the benefit. I mean, the reverse, the other end of the telescope, is looking for the benefit extension. So for me, when I was shocked by that diagnosis, there was also the focus how much my kids would benefit if I made a change.
I love that.
So that's the positive end of the equation, which is, you know, what do I really want? I don't want to be the mum who's snappy because she's tired, who hasn't really got enough time. And I don't, you know, encourage people to have to leave their careers. I work with a lot of very focused career women.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the balance was suddenly wrong. You know, I could see how much my whole family would benefit if I changed. And that made it easier.
They would get more of you back and you would get more of you back.
Win-win.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So let me go back to what we were saying before about this idea of replacing the wall, right? Like building up this wall around us as professionals is understandable. And it's like this very practical tool. And yet it's not the best thing for us. But somebody is listening right now going, okay, well, if the alternative is me being a sponge for everything that's going on, that doesn't work either.
Absolutely.
Suggestion?
Absolutely. And I wrestled with that a long time. You know, do you soak it all up and burn out, or do you build the wall? What else was there? And I thought about this for so long. What I resisted, but what I learned ultimately was that when you learn the skills of compassion and starting with yourself, then what starts to happen is firstly, you learn to manage your physiology in difficult situations, so the wall becomes less necessary. Secondly, you learn to identify your experience so that you can be a little bit more objective about what you're experiencing in the moment, rather than dragged under by the ankles, which, you know, is definitely, I'm a very empathic person. I can, you know, I well up easily. So I really had to work hard at this to understand how could I, learn to be less of a passenger, to take that tiny step back that allows you to stay connected, but to cultivate skills, and they are learned skills. You know, this is the thing I wish we were taught at medical school. They're learned skills that allow you to deftly navigate those uncomfortable feelings, and practicing self-compassion. It was nothing like I thought it was going to be. That's the first thing I really want to be clear about. I think we all think we know that self-compassion is be kinder to yourself. But actually, when I started to learn the skills, I realized, whoa, this is so much more about learning how to stay with difficulty in a skillful way.
I love that. So so just take us back and define compassion and self-compassion for folks.
So my teacher was Kristin Neff, and she was a lovely teacher. So I'm going to use her definition. Yeah. So she breaks down self-compassion into easy steps. The first is to be able to notice. So when I'm talking about awareness, or being able to name what's going on for you, or if you're talking about outward compassion, noticing what's going on for another being, another person, that's essential to have a compassion response. Now, that first bit is like where you can easily go straight into empathy. So there are 2 more steps to compassion to help with not just sort of getting sucked in. The second step is what she calls common humanity, which for me was a huge revelation, actually, which is this idea that we all struggle. It's normal to struggle. And actually, for me, as a kind of high functioning medical person, I've been walking around my whole life thinking that whenever I was struggling, I was failing. And that, perfection was kind of the rest of the time.
Absolutely.
And it was either, I'm fine or I'm failing. And this reminder that it's so much more normal to be struggling than not, actually, like really normalizing suffering and struggling as recognizing this is how it feels. This is how it feels to be in a situation with someone who's unwell or in difficulty. This is how it feels for me as a parent to feel like I'm not doing a good job, the shame of parenting, normalizing all of those experiences it's a huge one.
Messy is normal.
Messy is normal, exactly. We're all really complicated. We all struggle. So that's a really big chunk of compassion, is normalizing that, the experience. And then the third step, again, which as a carer I think is really important, is taking action, not necessarily to fix, but simply because something is challenging, something is a struggle. So when we're thinking of outward compassion, this is actually quite important for caregivers, because I relate to this particularly as a GP. Over the years, you start to feel like you've got to be the solution.
Yes.
Every time.
Yeah. Well, that's what you went to school for, after all, right? Like to fix
exactly
problems, and you have a prescription pad and you can order tests and you are the ultimate problem solver.
Exactly. And, certainly in the UK, it's like a new patient every 10 minutes and you come up with an action plan. It's very rapid. It's very easy to end up with all of that on your shoulders. But the reality of caring or being compassionate is that actually the outcomes are way more out of our control than we believe. So you can prescribe pills, but somebody might not take them.
Yes.
You can help them in
all the time that people do nothing with.
Exactly. So this idea of equanimity, which Kristin Neff talks about, the limits of our influence, and just recognizing that, developing that wisdom that says, I can listen, I can lean in with the intention to support, but I can't necessarily fix. And what that does is, I think it creates just a slight emotional distance. You're still fully engaged, you're still leaning in, but you're not ultimately taking it all on your own shoulders. Sometimes people find this difficult to take this concept, because there's that feeling of like, oh, does that mean I don't take responsibility? It doesn't mean that at all. Absolutely taking responsibility, but even when you do, some things are out of your control, whether it's what else is going on in that person's life, or whether the treatment works or not, or they might have a drug reaction, or something completely different could happen in their lives, unrelated to all of the effort that you're putting in. So those three steps, the awarenessing, the common humanity, and taking action, but recognizing that you're not necessarily fixing, that you're there to support. And that's a very simple, brief kind of summary of self-compassion. There's a lot of layers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think people, I'm hoping, are listening and going, oh, I need more of this. I need to hear more of this. I need to practice this. I need to, really dive in. We're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, we are. And one of the things that I've got very interested in, the more I've got involved in doing this work, is recognizing and understanding what makes us resist self-compassion. Because I was clearly one of those people who resisted the idea. When I first came across it, I didn't like it. I didn't think it was for me, because I was a caring professional. I really get that resistance. And one of the things, I had a really interesting conversation with a client just this week. One of the beliefs that gets in the way of self-compassion is we hear the phrase self-compassion, and somewhere deep down we believe we have to wait to be worthy.
Wow.
So a little voice in our head says, yeah, but you don't know what a bad person I am. You don't know how many people I've upset. I'm not perfect. In fact, I'm very far from perfect. All of those arguments come up in our minds. And the thing that really changed that for me was realizing that self-compassion isn't about waiting to be worthy for it. It's actually the opposite. We need the skills of self-compassion because we are imperfect and because life is really challenging. It's like, why wouldn't you be more supportive of yourself? And it turns it around. It turned it around for me, because if I'd have waited till I was perfect, I still wouldn't have started, clearly.
Same. I mean, I just like this idea that we're already worthy of self-compassion because we just need it to be a messy human.
Exactly. Why not be supportive of yourself, given how complex you are and given how complex life is? And for me, actually, there's a really powerful overlap between self-compassion and high performance, that instead of sabotaging yourself with self-criticism or denying yourself compassion, why wouldn't you include it to help you to be more of the human that you want to be? That's what really excites me.
It's
the idea that
prescription, right?
Absolutely.
Instead of offering to caring professionals, let's build a wall. It's saying what?
It's saying there is another way, that you can stay connected to yourself. You can still be that giving human, that compassionate, caring professional. And you can learn the skills and the wisdom to make that sustainable. And that, for me, that word is so important. If it's not sustainable, like, what are we doing to our health professionals if we're letting them just go again and again until they burn out? It's so important. And so it is possible. It's absolutely possible.
I want to say one more thing before we move on to rapid fire too, that I've become keenly aware of talking with you and in some other roles. Before we hopped on the podcast today, Nicola and I were talking about, some volunteer I did in a workshop for Ukrainian medical professionals. I think that sometimes people think, well, this problem with healthcare and how I feel as a healthcare professional, it's just in the US, or it's just in the UK, or it's right. But I don't know about you, Nicola, but I'm finding it's everywhere. If you're in a helping profession, this is pervasive.
Absolutely. And actually, it's really important to share that, because I was recently on an international call with healthcare providers from all over the world. This is everywhere. This is an issue in every system. And certainly in the UK, people love to think it's just the NHS that's falling apart. But actually, the moral injury of knowing what a good job looks like and not being able to do that job, the pressure, the workload, the unrelenting stress, particularly in the last couple of years, but even before that, yes, we're all struggling. And actually, I do think it's so helpful for us to connect more about this, that this is an international issue in every country. We're not alone. And again, the common humanity part of that is kind of helpful, supportive.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to transition us into some rapid fire here at the end. And you've kind of alluded to this first one already, but what do you think is one thing folks get wrong about self-compassion?
Well, I think that, yes, I've already alluded to the idea that we have to be worthy. I think the other thing that is really, really challenging for any of us, actually, is that there are a lot of words around compassion that we've soaked up as we've been growing up that feel like an obstacle to self-compassion. So, for example, self-absorbed or navel gazing, the fear that it's sort of soft and fluffy, and that if we become self-compassionate, we'll lose our motivation and our high standards. And I really, there's loads of research out there, but I just want to share my experience, which is I was terrified of all of that. And actually what I discovered is the opposite, that when you have the skills of self-compassion, you're less afraid of failing, because you have the resources, the resilience to keep going, to get back up, to learn from your mistakes. And so I've actually been the opposite. I've found that I'm much more motivated. I'm much more excited to try new things. I'm more bolshy, actually much more likely to call something out and say, have some fierce compassion So I think that worry that it's all soft and fluffy,
Yeah.
I just really want to just throw that out the window and say, seriously,
Love
you don't need to worry. It so
it. Yeah.
isn't. It's actually really courageous.
It's not going to make you soft and fluffy. Stronger and yeah. Okay. If you could go back to young Nicola in medical school, where you were already resisting this message, what would you tell her?
Oh my gosh, that makes me emotional. I just would want to say, trust yourself. And trusting yourself actually is something definitely that comes with learning self-compassion. I just didn't have it then. Because I was young, because I was female in a very male-dominated profession, I doubted my instincts and thought that I was just being a silly girl and I was being weak. And, I was wanting to focus on what they still call, I think, soft skills.
Yes.
But I was so right that desire to connect humans, to really see each other in those moments of struggle and suffering is absolutely what healing and healthcare is about. I just really wish I hadn't taken a massive detour. If I could just trust myself and stuck with that. Yeah.
It's so good. Often in healthcare, I think people get intimidated by professionals. Can you share with folks just, I'll use your term of the common humanity, but what's one thing that makes you perfectly imperfect, just a messy human?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the thing that patients forget is that doctors are patients too. And we have families that we worry about just like they do. And we all struggle, and we're all afraid. Actually, all humans are afraid. And that I know that, patients coming in are afraid. Doctors are afraid of not being good enough, of not getting it right. But also they have the same fears about their own health and their own families. And there was a wonderful study looking at the top 10 concerns of humans all around the world. And it doesn't matter what gender you are, what race, your religion, sexuality, we all have remarkably similar concerns. And, for me, that makes me just feel so much more connected to every other human being, realizing that. Yeah. And doctors are no different. They just need to learn to bring down the wall.
I hope everybody's hearing this consistent message. How do people work with you? We'll link up to your website, Nicola, but who's your ideal person to work with you? And just talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you. So I love to work with women. I don't work exclusively with women, but most of my clients are women. And I particularly love to work with women who really want to bring their power out into the world, but are frustrated by the fact that they're either people pleasing, burning out, spinning plates, or it's just not happening because the systems around them are very male orientated and perhaps make them feel like it's not happening for me. I'm very trauma focused, which is what drew us together as well. And I recognize that we wear a mask, we push ourselves, but actually underneath, we all have struggles that perhaps it's not always easy to share with other people. So I really love to create a very safe space with my clients to be able to move beyond some of those things that are holding them back in a way that feels completely safe and approachable. And I work with healthcare professionals as groups as well. So I love one-to-one coaching. It's my absolute passion. But like you, I'm also really keen to bring this work into, healthcare providers, actually schools. I was talking to head teachers the other day as well, because actually we're all the same. It doesn't matter what leadership role we're in. The struggles are very similar.
Yeah. Well, I know this audience really well, Nicola, who listened to this podcast. So by the time this airs, you should have about 432 new people contact because this is what we're all struggling with, right? And we all need more. Last question. It's 11 o'clock at night, which is closer for you right now than it is for me. And you have a food craving. What do you reach for?
I'm quite a savoury person, so I think it would be checking for the Christmas crisps that are in the cupboard. Maybe they're not going to make it to Christmas after all.
I don't know. You'll have to educate me. What's a Christmas crisp?
Oh, sorry. So crisps, what we call crisps in the UK, first of all, you call potato chips.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And Christmas means that I've hidden them in the back of the cupboard for Christmas, but they're not gonna, it's only the 16th of December or whatever. And so yeah, the special crisp that I was saving for another occasion.
Yes, it's like my Christmas cookies that are already gone.
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Nicola. I mean, the incredible compassion and tenderness that you're bringing into this space is palpable. I really appreciate the work that you're doing for women and for the healthcare profession at large. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, and same to you. Thank you so much as well. It's been a real honor. Thank you.
Absolutely.